Your algorithm profile explained. Why our curiosity leads to boredom. Define algorithm. Like, can we actually just define what it is that we're talking about? So this is part 1, and we'll be focusing on the word algorithm. It is divided into 2 parts. First, the impetus of this video to call things by their right name. Yeah, I watched Into the Wild. I will explain. So this video idea series was inspired by this need or this frustration that led to a response to pagemelt's Be Your Own algorithm. How the non-solution was a result of a poorly defined problem, which is define the algorithm, which is the second part of the video. And what supports this section is Giuseppe Longo's Prometheus's Nightmare 2023 Science and Its Limits, where we define the algorithm based on its mathematical foundations, calculation plus program, instead of simply relative to the application in social media. So this part of the video you can skip. It's kind of a caveat, but I think it's important because we live in a time where people focus more on disagreeable as a way to invalidate a sincere disagreement. So this series was taped on a very hot day, and my human body was exhibiting frustrations from that, but it does calm down throughout the rest of the video. The only other thing I would add is, okay, so this is the Into the Wild vibes thing, which is to call each thing by its right name. I think for me, the issue is not so much about the fear of confronting chaos. I mean, that's the whole job of philosophy. We deal with things that are abstract. We deal with things that are constantly in movement. We deal with things that are extremely complex. So that is really not the issue. For me, the definition of algorithm is really important, or maybe pagemelt meant to say that their definition is definitely only in relation to social media, which I also still think is wrong. But the point is that false identification or definition, while only fatal for Alexander Supertramp in Into the Wild, it still has consequences in real life, and in a way it's somewhat fatal as well, but I'm not going to go too far. But another quote that I just thought that highlights why it is that sometimes I get extremely passionate is this quote: "Rather than love, than money, than fame, give me truth." And that really resonated with me when it came out in the film. For me, it's to my limited capacity, I seek the truth. I know it sounds a certain way, but I can only tell you what I believe motivates me, and you can take it the way that you'd like to take it. And the last thing that I would like to say is this example, which is when I was doing my class on aesthetics and we focused on theater, I asked my professor, I was just like, who do you think knows theater better? The actors who live, breathe, and sweat, and throw themselves into the lives of the characters of Shakespeare, or the critics, the ones who have watched different dozens, hundreds of versions of Shakespeare? And he looked at me smugly and he was just like, the philosophers. So this is why we have budget cuts, and this is why people kind of don't like us. But touche. So my final remarks on pagemelt is that the analysis of the response is the first part of the video that explains the impetus and where it is that the starting point of the idea of this series came from. And it's no different from pagemelt's response to the book, which is not positive, as in like, I liked it, it's perfect, don't fix anything. Overall, I thought the video was very well researched, but it just didn't deliver a solution based on, in my opinion, a poorly defined problem or definition to start, again, the algorithm. Oh, and the other thing that I thought I would add was that I'm aware that they work in tech, and I am a philosophy student at Sorbonne, and the point with Sorbonne is that American in tech philosophy student in France, modes of thinking, points of reference, ways of choosing to address the problems are different. So now you have 2 different ways to identify the problem or try to understand the problem. Hopefully it encourages more solutions than problems. That's all I want to say onto the video. So let's begin with the first part of the video. At first, I wanted it to be about my response to pagemelt, be your own algorithm. It was mainly a video essay response to this book, and I asked the group if I missed anything because the only solution that I saw was that, okay, to skip the algorithm or to recreate your algorithm is to learn how to code and to create a page that is just extremely aesthetically not satisfying. I really liked pagemelt's point about cringe, but I think like labeling it as cringe in and of itself is a problem. This website for ourselves, for self-expression, which is again something that Joshua clocked very well in terms of, oh, okay, I guess the solution is just to be a content creator. The second thing for me is just like basically the fact that there's no algorithm that we recognize in terms of like most relevant or people we follow. That thing that pagemelt presented, in my opinion, is just something that functions on a different algorithm and doesn't actually mean that you get to be your own algorithm. Again, this will come when I actually explain what algorithm is. I sound so severe, it's because it's really hot. Okay, wait. So focus. So it doesn't actually solve the problem because you're not actually becoming anything, the algorithm that you are not anyway, but you're actually jumping from one algorithmic platform to another. The second is the issue with us being stuck within this algorithm. So one, you don't actually escape this algorithm by jumping into another algorithm. Two, I think it's like you creating this website for expression has nothing to do with your actual online profile, which is the thing that feeds the algorithm and the thing that actually defines your algorithm of what are the things that you're actually served on Google, the things that you're actually served on YouTube. And again, I use served because these are all service platforms where we search for things. Like YouTube is an educational platform. Besides entertainment like Mr. Beast, YouTube is somewhere that people go to learn how to fix problems. There's that, and just to get to the second point is that you're more aware of the For You page. You're more aware of being automatically thrown all this stuff. And the idea is that you can actually fix your algorithm or be your own algorithm if you actually don't mindlessly scroll, you're more conscious, you like put it away, you realize that like, you know, it's a question of loneliness, which is another thing that I will not talk about in this video. The way that I imagine this analogy is that you are in this one limited bookstore. All you're doing is that instead of going to the recommended section, you're going into another section of the bookstore, but you still are limited to this fraction of what it is that you're being served. As in, the reason why, okay, this bookstore that I always used to go to was in Silver Lake. I went there because they had a huge range of Holbeck books. That's based on my interests and that's based on my demographic and that's based on geographically where I was placed. So that being said, it doesn't change your algorithm. If you choose not to go to the recommended section, which is the For You page, or you actually choose to wander around the rest of the bookstore, because your profile or where you end up online, your digital version online, is the same as in real life. Like all the choices that you make, where you choose to live, how you want to educate yourself, what your interests are, is everything that led you to this bookstore, is what I'm saying. And the selection of the books will not change, even if you choose not to go with what is recommended to you directly. So thank you, Adam, for bringing this to my attention, because I didn't have a specific target of what it is that I wanted to say about the algorithm, but this video was frustrating enough for me to make this video. On that note, let's move on to actually defining what the algorithm is. So the definition that I had that was absolutely not satisfactory for both Adam and Joshua was a whole of operatory rules that intervene in all species of calculations. So essentially like rules that come into place to define how it is that calculation works. So because of this disagreement, which is great, a lot of the times like axioms is actually really helpful for me. So thank you for everyone who's supporting me, because it's not only just the pledge that supports me, but it is also the fact that I can actually see where people are at, what the gap is between my understanding of things and the general understanding of things. So this definition, or this compilation of definitions, comes from Prometheus's Nightmare, Science and Its Limits by Giuseppe Longo, 2023. And just a quick background, Prometheus is this titan in Greek mythology known for stealing fire from the gods and giving it to humanity, symbolizing the quest for knowledge and progress. So the way that I learned it was basically, he was just like, oh, poor humans, we're completely naked. Like we have absolutely no tools to combat nature. So he's like, I'm gonna give them fire so that we can actually survive. And yeah, we're winning because we're destroying nature. On that beautiful note, let me just start with the goal of the book. And just to be transparent, this book, I only read the introduction and a bit of the first chapter. All right, so the goal is to define exactly the notion of algorithm and its languages, precisely to demonstrate that there is no algorithm for deciding this, calculating that, which gives us the definition, tools, and language of modern calculation. So one thing that's really nice about this author is that he has a perspective and an attitude towards the current zeitgeist of algorithm, which I completely fuck with. So the definition and origin. We will recall that the theory of program and calculation, and keep that in mind because these are the 2 points that we're going to talk about further, i.e. calculability and the rigorous notion of algorithm, originated in the analysis of the limits of deduction and formal calculation, i.e. in the work of 1930s on the foundations of mathematics. And then just something I decided to add, which is mathematical invention is never simply the practice of calculation nor a mechanical deduction from axioms. So that is just to say that we will always have a difficulty in separating two things, which we will see in the definition of calculation. Algorithm, he has basically said, is composed of two notions, which is program and calculation. So let's start with calculation. By calculation, we mean an exclusively formal, which is determined or meaningless, process mechanically transforming discrete marks into other discrete marks according to writing rules composed of marks that are themselves discrete, with the interpretation of these discrete marks as meaningful, results occurring only after the fact and through all manners of mediations called compilations that take us away from the level of formal process itself. The original model of calculation, the computer as imagined by Turing in the 1930s, is, it should be remembered, that of a machine for reading and writing marks without any intervention of meaning interfering with this formal process. Evidently, it took a great deal of intelligence, even genius, to succeed in breaking away from the fundamental human attitude of considering signs as signifying wholes prior to the division between formal mark and meaning. So here, the difference between mark and meaning, and I think it's interesting, and I have to read more of the book, but mark is a very interesting thing compared to sign. And symbols, because those are very loaded terms in philosophy. But to continue, only writing in its alphabetical version has made this division historically possible, and programmers today have the delicate task of making it effective by succeeding in the feat of putting themselves in the place of machines without introducing the notion of programs that would require interpretation. So what I take away from this is that what a calculation is the transformation of meaningless input, marks, once compiled gains meaning. So what I also found interesting was this idea of alphabets, which he talks about later. And the way that I understand how this process is actually separated into two is that you imagine, like, alphabets that become words, but then let's just work with the words analogy. So when you have a bunch of alphabets, you put it together, it becomes words. What the transformation is that a word is transformed based on its conjugation, past, present, future, conditional. And in German terms, in different cases. So the datif, nomatif, wow, why did I start with datif? Nomatif, datif, genitif. Why am I using a French accent? Nomatif, accusatif, datif, genitif. So these 4 cases. And because these words are transformed in that way, then you start compiling them into different positions based on the grammatical structure. So you have these transformation of words. When they're compiled into the grammatical structure, it gives you syntax, which is the interpretation of this compilation. So here, the main thing to take away is that all that calculation is the transformation from marks into other marks. Discrete, in this sense, I would just say is that the thing that you saw before, it just transforms into something completely different. So when we say like mutation is a discrete event, it basically means that there's a separation between state 1 and state 2. So an example would be, I guess, the most simple verb, which is to be. One compilation or arrangements of marks of alphabets, T-O space B-E. But then you change it and you conjugate it, so it's like I am, they are, she is. And then you have the different tenses, she was, they were. And you can see how to be, how did BE suddenly become WERE? So that is the idea of discrete and discontinuous. There's a separation of how one thing becomes another thing. And the second thing is that meaning comes after when you compile all of these things together. I think the other analogy that I would just like to say with this before we move on to the definition of program is that it would be really helpful if we stop over-interpreting the different marks and different processes of the algorithm to give us some kind of meaning that doesn't really have any yet. And I think that's one of the things that adds to the mystery. We're looking at different parts of the process and just trying to pull out a lot of things. I don't know if I'm allowed to completely say this, but well, it is available. Anyway, so being a content creator on YouTube, YouTube reaches out to us. I can't really be super specific about a lot of different things, but obviously they want us to keep surviving on the platform because we're the ones making everyone money. When it was asked what it is that creators wanted the most, it was that we wanted to know, not me, but like the creators wanted to know what the data that was given to us means. So what does it mean when your click rate is this much? It's like we have an ample amount of data. Like when do people click off? What is the highest point of the video? What is the click-through rate? How many times our videos are presented to someone? And what they wanted was no longer just the numbers. They wanted the interpretation of the numbers so we could just stop guessing. But what I just really want to highlight with this is that those numbers are just the representation of the information that they have. Maybe there isn't some deeper meaning that you're trying to enforce so that you can make it useful to you. It's the same as like, you know, you just imagine a relationship, people send text and you read so much into the text. You read so much into the words that they use and you assume like this type of person would say this kind of thing. And then you start like interpreting everything based on your context and you start assuming their context and what they mean by something. And then you realize, which is one of the best advice that I had with one of my friends, which is sometimes like you just have to see things play out. Like you can't overinterpret anything and hope for some answers. So with that, let's move on to program. A program is any sign, alphabetic or numeric, manipulated according to given rules as a sequence of signs. So an algorithm based on this superficial compilation of what it is that Longo gave, because again, I didn't read the entire book yet. These are my words. The algorithm is therefore the manipulation of the transformation process of signs according to given rules as a sequence of signs. So quite simply, you cannot be the algorithm because the algorithm is the service or something that is not you. So to say be your own algorithm is absolutely, I'm gonna say nonsense, but this interpretation could also be naive because I've only read that little of the book. And I would just like to end this first part of this series because this video is really too long, saying that overall, I did really enjoy pagemelt's video. I thought it was extremely well researched. I learned a lot of things. So in that way, I think that the video is successful. But again, my biggest critique is the fact that what was promised in the title and the thumbnail was not actually delivered in the video, which I think is extremely important. But yeah, I hope you find this helpful and I'll see you in part 2.